Hello, welcome everyone. So today we have a really good friend of Refactor here with us to talk about his journey through tech from both his perspective as a coach, but also as a principal engineer. And I think that you'll really enjoy what we have for you today. And this is a continuation, a very long continuation from our very first career stories that we did with Mecca. A lot of folks will remember him. He's a frequent speaker for Refactor, and he gave us a great just telling of his career, but also like some tips and some gems there, because Mecca has to drop a gem in every conversation. I learn something new every time I talk to him. And so we're continuing that series here with Anthony Mays, and would love to hear a little bit more about Anthony and what you've been up to.
Hey, Erica, so good to see you, and thanks for inviting me to this conversation. Again, I'm Anthony D. Mays, close to 25-year software engineer, or maybe over 25 years at this point. Who's counting?
What is
I've been,
time?
yeah, exactly. So I've been a software engineer for a long time. Spent 8 years at Google before leaving in 2022, in order to run my own consultancy where I was doing career coaching, interview coaching, and generally teaching software engineers how to be software engineers. I recently got a regular job, so moonlighting once again, and working as a principal software development engineer at Zillow. So very grateful to be in now my 5th week at the company. So obviously I'm just going to, talk about stuff I know and not speaking on behalf of my employer. Felt the need to say that, like I haven't had to say that in a while.
I love it. I love it. And I love that your search is so recent, because I think that will give people a lot of really good information about what folks are looking for in 2026. And also just another little tidbit. Anthony and I have known each other for a really long time. Anthony was doing his coaching thing before he ever left Google. And the way that I met him was because my first time applying to Google back in 2015, Mecca introduced me to Anthony, and Anthony was my champion and helped me through that process. So he's been helping folks build their careers, and we're going to learn a little bit more from him in this discussion. So let's start by understanding maybe the trends you're seeing in the industry and give our audience kind of a state of tech in 2026.
Yeah, so basically it's AI everywhere all the time, right? This is no stranger to anyone who's been around the block. It's all about, I heard it said today, and we're kind of shifting into this phase of AI integration. So there was kind of the freaking out, and then there was the replacing everybody and hoping that we could just prompt our way to glory, and then realizing that that was a huge mistake, and then like trying to bring the humans back into the loop again.
I love that. First of all, I need to find a way to prompt our way into glory. I need to find a way to fit that into conversation, because that's great. And I
Right.
think that is the phase that we were in for quite a while with AI. And to your point, now kind of moving into integration. But this has affected a lot of different areas of engineering. So for one, there's this growing trend toward generalist specialists. I've heard some folks call it kind of the T-shaped engineer or the T-shaped
Yeah.
engineering career. So is the era of kind of the siloed, specialized engineer, do you think that's over?
No, absolutely not. I think that's probably furthest from the truth. It's just the silos that matter are different than what they used to be, right? So, maybe it really mattered for you to be a React specialist and really strong in like doing, you know, state management, and managing the complexity of that. And that kind of depth doesn't matter like it used to, and matters a little bit less as we progress and as computers get more capable of like handling those specific kinds of details. But like being more of a domain knowledge expert and going deep on that is where folks are going to be more and more important, and so I think that's something that will remain true for a long time, right? Is that we still need specialists, just they need to specialize in different areas than they did yesterday. Breadth also still matters, because the scope of what we need to deal with as engineers is growing and growing, right? So tomorrow's engineer won't be stuck in between curly braces. They'll be thinking about maybe products or a suite of products and how they all work together. And they'll be thinking about not just the technical domain problems, but the business domain problems, and thinking more in terms of system constraints and business constraints, and less about technical constraints, and really leaving that to the machines to kind of work out So that's both scary and empowering. And I feel that one thing that's prepared me more than anything else for this phase of my life, especially as a pretty new principal software engineer, has been entrepreneurship, like building a business and thinking about accounting and marketing and legal and all those other kinds of things. Being an entrepreneur has broadened my mind to think about everything that goes into running a business that I haven't had to think about as just being a line engineer. And I think that knowledge prepares me well for now thinking about how AI is a tool to inform my understanding of all those areas so that I can kind of direct an LLM in the right way or even direct other teams, right? And I think the role of a principal engineer is not much different now than it has been before. It's just that the feedback loop is way faster, right? I don't have to like focus on a business idea and then wait for months to validate things. I can rank through a few business ideas in an order of months and get that same kind of feedback a lot faster. And so, that is, I think, an interesting place to be. Again, it's very empowering for those who know what to do with it. It's very scary for those who don't or who are just solely focused on being replaced.
Yeah, when you mentioned the entrepreneurship mindedness, bringing a little extra flavor to your role now, that reminds me of something I've tried to tell a lot of engineers that I've worked with or mentored about being kind of a product minded, product driven engineer. So
Right.
thinking more holistically about the product actually puts you in a much better position given this kind of AI world that we're living in now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's what we've always talked to, or hopefully what we've talked to engineers about when it comes to career progression, right? When you're more junior, you're still learning the technical ropes and understanding how to do things. And, maybe you're entrusted with implementing a little slice of a thing, but you clearly have to be told what to do. And, you're just kind of responsible for the output versus as you grow through more senior levels of your career, problem scope expands, things become much more nebulous and ambiguous, and you're just charged with taking a big old honking problem and figuring it out, right? Sometimes it's just figuring out the problem that we need to solve next, right? Because nobody really knows what the problem is that we need to solve next, and you need to go figure that out. And so, the engineer's career, even whether you're an IC or whether you want to become a manager one day, is effectively the same, right? Is just solve bigger problems with less clarity, more ambiguity, and get through ideation to solution. I think the biggest thing that's changing in this year going forward is that what it means to be entry level in this industry is vastly different, right? Like the junior engineer of yesterday is going away, and what was senior is now like entry level, right? And I anticipate that maybe what's principal today is going to be entry level tomorrow, right? Where it's we need you to be thinking in terms of systems and bigger problems, and then using tools to break them down and go make big parts of it work. And it's okay if you don't get 100%, just getting close enough to bring in other experts and other specialists to take it from say 70% to 100% is really what's required, right? So you get it to 70%, let the domain experts get it from 70% to 100%, and then you just wash and repeat until you build these systems of increasing complexity.
So let's dig into how that affects folks at different levels of their career, because you touched on it a little bit. Because AI is handling a lot of the entry level tasks. So, how can junior engineers get a foot in the door and develop the deep logic skills that we used to get from learning by doing?
Yeah, so I mean, it's basically that learning by doing, but doing way more of it, way more frequently, right? It used to be the case, and remember that software engineers already had a low floor in CS stuff. If you have a computer, you can build stuff, you can deploy it. I mean, I remember where the constraint used to be hardware. You needed
Mm,
a nice beefy computer, right, to install these tools and play around. And then you had the software licenses and CDs and all this other stuff.
yep.
And then we got the internet and cloud. And now it's like, oh, you want to build up a planet scaling system, on custom hardware that, Google makes or Microsoft makes, no problem. That's solved. We can do all that. And now we're at this point where, the real constraint is really your ideas, right? There's some things for which having a development team is useful. Well, what if that team is you and an LLM and a bunch of agents that are going and run off and doing this stuff. Now the limit is just what can you dream of? How quickly can you dream of it? And how can you validate that it's something that's useful to the market? Do you even understand what your market is, right? Do you know how to think about product market fit and whether what you're building is going to be useful to somebody, right? So that getting into the habit of building frequently and regularly and with intentionality isn't something that we're, I think, naturally born with, and not something that our modern education system even really encourages, right? We're trained to be told what to do, and then to do it, and then to get a grade, and then, you know, to go show somebody a piece of paper, right? That we did all those things and followed instructions. Whereas, you know, we're in this world where no, you've got to be the one to tell, you know, tools and agents what to do, and to define the problem in such a way that you are accomplishing whatever your goals are. And so, you know, that is, it's something that you need to, as a self-learner and as someone who's interested in your own career growth, take responsibility for, right? My son is in this exact position. He's a new adult. He's in his second year of college. I'm like, son, you need to be, I understand you want to get a CS degree like your dad. That's great. Love it. You know, want to go to the school I went to. Fantastic. If you aren't building something like every single week, you're falling behind by that much, or potentially by years, right? Because it's that muscle that's really going to enable you to know where your place is in this new world. And I'm not saying that education doesn't matter and that context doesn't matter, far from it. But that education is only useful to the extent that you can show that you can build with it, right? And solve real problems that matter to people. And so even that focus on people, on the end user, still matters as much as it did before. Nobody's building this AI stuff for other machines to be happy, right? We're building it so that other people can be empowered to solve whatever problems they're facing, right? And move the needle.
Absolutely. And let's take the other side of that, right? So we talked about junior engineers, but with so much code being generated versus written, how do senior engineers set themselves apart?
Yeah, again, it's the same thing. It's just at an increasingly bigger level. So I think, you know, for a junior, they're thinking more through validating what the system is doing, understanding what it's doing, right? And understanding how to ask for the things that you want in the way that you want it, with the proper quality gates in place and all of that stuff. So for instance, you need to know to ask an LLM to write unit tests for you. You need to ask it to think through integration scenarios. You need to ask it to consider principles that are important to you when you're engineering, right? Those are the things that you need to do. Things that are more second nature to someone who's senior, right? Who just knows and takes it as granted that these things need to be here. And so as you're senior, you're starting to think more in terms of, again, the why. What is the purpose for building what I'm building? Why does it need to be this? Why can't it be that? Does a computer even need to be involved at all, right? Does a machine need to be involved at all? And as you're senior, you should be asking more questions, probing these things, focusing on cross-functional collaboration, developing those communication skills, developing those written skills as well, right? I think that as a senior, you need to be thinking about how you communicate with other people, because again, the more that you climb the ladder, it's not just what you get done, it's how you get it done, right? Working with other people. And so as a senior engineer, you need to be concerned about your influence on other people, right? And how you are solving problems within that context.
So let's shift a bit and talk a little bit more about the day in a life of a principal engineer. I imagine that we have quite a few folks watching who are current engineers, aspiring engineers, who are striving to get to that level. So tell us a little bit more about the technical leadership and decision making that goes into your job.
Yeah. So, you know, again, I'm 5 weeks into this particular role, so it's still pretty new for me. And I think one of the interesting things that has taken me aback about this role is that there is a process that one must go through to even define everything that the role entails. There's like, you know, some basic general things around, you know, figuring out the problems that you need to solve, figuring out, you know, who matters for the work that you're trying to get accomplished, and just kind of getting your lay of the land there and understanding the technology. So there's just kind of those table stakes, but then there's also understanding like What does the team need? What kind of culture do you need there? How do you need to communicate to folks to, you know, tackle the things that are most important, right? How do you know what not to tackle right now? So, I think for me, a lot of it has been like unearth all the skeletons, right? Figure out where all the graves are, and then figure out like the most important place to start cleaning up, right? And do that by consensus and with support from the right stakeholders. And so it's been, I think, a fun challenge for me, right, to go through that and say, okay, I'm starting to see the things that are issues, the things that are opportunities for growth. And, of these things, here are maybe the top two or three things that I'm sensing are priorities. Here's a little bit of, what leadership wants, but here's also what I want. And here's the intersection of those two things and where I believe I can best be effective. And so there's that part of it. The other thing that I was surprised by is just how much rapid prototyping and just experimenting with things is very important. A lot of the job of Principal for me has been thinking through like, what's even possible to do in this area? There's maybe 5 different ways we can solve this problem. Which one might be the most expedient? What might be the most interesting? And this is where AI as a tool has been really transformative because I've been able to kind of jump in to the space and like prototype something that easily would have taken me weeks and days instead. Things that take days now take hours. And so being able to just quickly iterate and not just come up with smoke and mirrors, talking through ideas, but like, no, I can actually build this with even a very incomplete knowledge of the system, right? Because I know how to prompt and know how to ask the right questions. Knowledge acquisition is another thing that has really been a game changer for me just with AI tools. And I think that's anybody who really hasn't gotten into using AI at this point really needs to start there with just learning how to learning how to discover information, learning how to use these tools to do research properly, dig into details on things. That has been really important. And, it's been amazing how quickly I've been able to just onboard into a new role at a new company using AI as a tool to just help get through a lot of the dumb questions that you just have to ask when you're first starting at a place. Everything from understanding acronyms to figuring out where the big systems are and how you get into all that stuff. That has been just incredibly helpful. And so, I'd say that for me, spending a lot of time using AI in those 2 ways, right? Education and learning and just building out that breadth of knowledge within the company context, but then also, to rapid prototyping. And if I have to get into the weeds, just making that very quick, because a lot of my time shouldn't be coding. It should be figuring out the problems that we need to solve and how we need to solve them. And then hopefully giving direction to other folks or other teams about like what needs to be done and letting them execute.
Awesome. So digging in a little bit more there. So are you using AI agents in your day-to-day? And how has that changed from, say, your last industry role at Google to your role now at Zillow? Like, how has that changed your day-to-day?
Yeah. So basically none of this stuff was around in or not around well in 2022. And so 2022, I was still very much crafting the curly braces by hand, right? And now there's kind of the expectation that, you really aren't in the curly braces, right? You are using these systems and sometimes not even really caring about what it generates, which still is a wild idea to me. Like I just can't fathom letting an LLM generate all my code and then not looking at it and shipping PR. And I don't know that anybody's advocating for that, but I think that time is maybe soon coming, right? Where you don't even need to look at the output. You're just working in, feeding in the right constraints and checking things that way. So, for me, it's been just an entirely different world. Today, I copy pasted some code only because I needed to, right? But like up to this point, it's all been like, no, you go move the code over here and do this, and I want the tests, and make sure everything passes and runs this command, run this command line, and okay, great. This is looking basically the way that I want it to be. Now, granted, a lot of this is prototyping stuff, so it's designed to be throwaway and not production ready. And so I think that, on the first opportunity that I have to go, write more of the production ready stuff, it'll definitely be a whole lot more review and think through what's going on with the curly braces. But even then, I'm still not writing those curly braces. I'm saying, here's the result that I want. I want it to look this way. And then at this point, I'm just reviewing code to confirm that what was produced is what I wanted and what I expected. And sometimes it's about like, if the output is wrong, change the output. I go back and rework the inputs because that means that there's an opportunity to maybe introduce a tool or an MCP or an API or a library or whatever that may be to make the job of that LLM easier to take what I'm providing in terms of natural language and turn that into something technically precise. And so that is, the other thing that's interesting too is that I have two types of users now, right? One is the human developer, right? And that developer could be someone who's another engineer or could be someone who's non-technical, right? And they're relying on vibe coding tools. So there's that kind of user, but then there's also just agents generally, right? Like a lot of companies want to open up everything to the agents. So the code bases, the documents, the calendar, the Slack messages, all that stuff. Because the more that we can open up access to LLMs, the more powerful and useful they can be in terms of executing tasks on our behalf. And so it's like, okay, well, how do I program for a computer, right? That wants to look at the code base, do the right thing, right? And be able to handle some tasks for someone else, maybe who wants to integrate with that. So, it's still weird to me, thinking in those terms, but also really fun because I kind of feel like I'm living in iRobot at this point.
Yeah, I think we're very close to iRobot status. So you mentioned this before, right? You mentioned we're not quite at this place where we can generate code and expect it to be correct and just push that as a PR. So we're still at this place where we need to be thinking ourselves through kind of the long-term maintainability. So tell me about some ways that you ensure long-term maintainability, and when do you say no to, a shiny new tool?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think the first thing is there's two principles. Number one is I'm always programmed for humans, right? Even if I'm designing for agents, I'm still pretending that there's a human on the other end of that. And so things like documentation matter, tests matter, comments matter, all that stuff. Making sure that the API surface is straightforward to reason about. So those are things that good engineers always do and will continue to do, at least for the foreseeable future. When it comes to understanding whether a tool might be useful or not, I think the one thing that I look for in my cheat code is like, is there magic involved? Because if there's magic, I don't like that, because that means that there's something of a black box or whatever there is that's just not that most people maybe wouldn't anticipate, right? To make sense. And so I'm very wary of magic, right? I don't like that. I need to be able to kind of point to the past and how things are working and understand what the foundations are before adopting that tool. I was thinking, I don't know why this just came to mind, but OpenClaw came to mind, or, formerly Mobot, and this, that, and the other. It's like, yes, an agent that can do everything for you. Well, how is it going to do everything for me, right? The first thing that comes to my mind naturally is you got to give it access and permission, right? And how much access and permission are you going to give this thing? Am I just going to let that run on my corporate MacBook and go crazy? Heck no, right? And I'm going to do that before even the proper gates and controls are in place, because I know they're not, right? You have to be savvy enough to know that, like, yeah, you should probably throw this on a VM or a container somewhere and restrict the kinds of tools it has access to and all that other stuff. So it looks like magic to a lot of people because they don't understand the foundations of technology, right? They don't understand the OSI layers, right? They're not thinking about, the different levels and protocols that are involved in making all this stuff work. And because I have that foundation, it's a lot easier to reason about, like, that seems cool, but is also incredibly risky. Let's be very slow about adopting that, right? Or at least make sure to ask these and these questions. So that has been a guiding thing for me. And then also, there's advice that I follow that I also teach candidates in interview prep, which is, if you're an engineer looking to work at, a big company, you got to do these design interviews. And one of the things that you need to be thinking about are the ilities: reliability, maintainability, security, et cetera, et cetera. Good systems know how to address several of those ilities, right? And you need to be thinking about how the tools that you use contribute to one or more of those system qualities. And so me, as I'm looking at new tools or new opportunities, I'm thinking about, how are they useful for those different qualities that I want out of what I'm building, right? The same as any craftsman in any area, right? You want to build a specific kind of a toy, out of wood. The kind of wood matters, right? There's some woods that are more smooth, some that are more coarse, some that are easier to stain, others that are more resilient to rough play, some that are softer, right? And knowing the result that you want drives the kind of materials that you use and how well they're able to adapt to what you need.
So have you found that AI helps us pay down technical debt? Or is it actually creating a new kind of technical debt that we'll have to fix in a year or two?
Yeah, it definitely is, right? So it's doing both, right? And it really depends on how you wield it. I think there are a lot of people who think of AI as this magic thing that can like build my SaaS platform in a couple of days and I go and launch that. Just chock full of technical debt, right? That's not going to hold up. It's great for prototyping, right? But as we know, the first rule of prototypes is they're designed to be thrown out and then you go build it the way you're supposed to. So amazing how many people still don't realize that today in 2026, but nevertheless. So I know that there's folks like Angie Jones and the folks who work on Goose who've talked a lot about this, right? And about how we empower these tools to help pay down technical debt or at least keep it from rising at an escalating level. So thinking about that from the beginning is really the right approach to help you build responsibly, right? But also for things like legacy systems or systems that are maybe transitioning into this new era, there's this great opportunity to use AI to just go deal with all the trivial stuff that we mere mortals don't want to have to deal with so that we can focus on the bigger problems. And so, I think it'll be interesting to think about how we build, adapters and facades to, deal with some of that stuff. I keep thinking about like the software that runs our transportation infrastructure. A lot of that stuff is still COBOL and Fortran, right? And the people who
Not
know
a
that
government
stuff,
code. Yep.
you know what I mean? They're dying off. And so like maybe the right answer will be let's train, agents to go throughout these systems and figuring out, where to make those precise cuts so that we can start modernizing more of this technology that can't just be easily replaced overnight. So a lot of opportunities exist like that. Somebody's got to be thinking about it. And most importantly, someone responsible needs to be thinking about that.
Absolutely. That's a whole other conversation. Someone responsible
Right.
thinking through some of this. So as a principal, you and staff, probably like that level staff from principal, you often find that you're leading through influence rather than direct management. So what's a specific non-coding skill that has saved a project that you've worked on from failure?
That's a really good question. I think throughout my career, one thing that has been super important, just, even in my days as a senior engineer, is just the ability to refactor quickly. So, being able to solve a problem once is great. Being able to solve that problem 5 different ways, optimizing for varying things is really, I think, what has empowered me the most over my career. I can remember when I first joined Google and I was, pretty new to the code review process, or at least at that level. And every code, all the code that I submitted was just a constant battle. It's just, no, okay, yes, technically it works, but there's no way this is actually going to hold up in production. You need to go redo it. And then I do it, and then it's, okay, but you didn't conform to the style guide. So now you need to go do it again. And then right? And then it's like, okay, great. It conforms to the style but there's already a tool that does like 30% of what you're doing here. So go plug that tool in. And so I think that being able to just iterate and refactor, solutions to optimize for the things that you need that continues to be a really important skill. Like, 'cause sometimes you make an educated guess about what you need to do and you get it wrong and you have to go back to the drawing board. And again, this is where I'm super grateful that we have AI tools because that process is way faster than it used to be. Maybe it takes you a quarter to build something in days past. It's going to take you, at least another quarter to unwind that and then go build it the way that you should have. Maybe a bit faster because you've learned from the previous mistakes. The cost for doing that kind of iteration is so much lower now than it used to be. And so that means that you can take more risks safely because you know that time isn't as much of an issue as it used to be before. And so I feel a little bit more emboldened to recommend things that maybe I would have been more hesitant to recommend in the past because I know that it takes time. It takes time to kind of figure out if it's going to work and then it can take time to unwind it if it doesn't. So I think having that boldness to go in and say, hey, maybe we can try this thing. I'm pretty sure that we can, build something maybe in a week, right? That we can actually try and bang around and maybe introduce us to some users. And if we don't like it, that's fine. We'll just have the LLM redo it all over again, so long as we understand what the constraints are, right? And so that kind of thing is just, again, super empowering and makes it feel more safe, right? As a principal to explore these various paths and make sense of it.
Great. So now let's shift to your coaching hat and share
Mm,
some real talk career advice. So
yeah.
what should an engineer's professional portfolio look like in 2026?
That's a good question. So I think more than anything else, right, your portfolio needs to demonstrate your aptitude for handling AI tools, right? You need to demonstrate that you know how to think agentically. And so and again, that is less about I built a thing using these tools and more about I built a thing that has impact for these people, right? And here was the measurable result of that. So, long gone are the days of to do apps, right? Getting you interview conversations. It's more like, I built a platform or I built a clone of a thing and it actually works end to end. And it's, here it is on K8s and, here are the problems that I ran into or here are the tools that I use to put that all together. That's the kind of thing that you need to be demonstrating today because it is just unacceptable for an engineer to apply for any role and to be like an AI skeptic or or a software engineering purist. Like the market is just not looking for those people right now and actively working to push them out of the company, right? So that they can replace them with someone who is willing to adopt those tools and use them. And so that has to be, I think, first priority for today's engineer looking to get roles today. Whether you want to be software engineer, ML engineer, whatever, right? It's just an expectation. I think the other thing too, though, is the scope, right? Evidence of being able to solve more complex problems and larger problems is another, I think, important thing to exhibit in your portfolio. So again, it's not did you build a to-do app? It's did you build this system to solve some interesting problem and put it out there for people to try. So one of the things that prepared me, and I'm not sure that I did this consciously, but I wanted to really cut my teeth on this vibe coding thing, on this agentic thing. And so I built a platform to help people with reasoning about coding interviews. And so I built a tool called Mocker, and it's not something that I would have had any time in the world to actually build myself as an entrepreneur, but being able to use LLM tools to vibe code parts of it and just think through the architecture and just, you know, build my experience and my skills. It was great. And it was one of those things that like provided me the most important technical interview prep for the role that I went and acquired. It wasn't leak code, right? I did maybe 3 leak code problems just to keep my fingers warm, and that was it. And everything was like easy or medium level. Most of the preparation that was actually useful was building things, right? And I remember my manager saying that, like, yeah, the fact that you said that you built this thing and that you put it out there and, that you actually had real customers and money, like that was meaningful and impressive. And so, that is, I think, the way that, right now interviewing hasn't adapted to what it needs to be going forward. I think there's still a lot of the old techniques that are still being used today and like leak code and yada, yada, yada. I think tomorrow it won't be so much about that as it will be like, hey, here's a problem, go actually build the system in an hour, right? Things that we would have never have been able to do even a couple of years ago will be kind of the expectation in the interview, right? So it's not like, hey, I remember when I was coming up, it's like, we want you to build a guest book website. It's just a single page thing. And, you add a comment and you persisted and you show it on the screen and yada, yada, yada. That used to be like the project. And now I can imagine that being like, build the guest book SaaS platform, right? Where anyone can come in and, have their guest book thing and deployed and working. go from 0 to a working version of that potentially could scale. So that is a bigger kind of problem, right? That is increasingly more than possible to solve given today's tooling. So, again, you won't feel comfortable with that unless you've already been training yourself on that process, right? Of going through and really it's not anything new, right? It's just waterfall in, hour by hour as opposed to, over a whole year. And I think that was interesting too, like going from waterfall to agile to now like agile in seconds with an LLM, that just gets through the whole cycle that quickly. So it's all the same stuff, just a lot faster and more impactful.
Awesome. So I think we've all heard stories of some large number of roles being filled by referrals or back channels. So what does networking look like for an introvert who just wants to code?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for me, networking doesn't mean that you can't be an introvert, right? It doesn't mean that you need to be on 24/7 doing video, pressing palms and all that. You can write, you can post, you can script, right? Do all that stuff and be effective. And I think that even now the introvert has more tools than ever, right? Like you don't even have to show your face. You can have an AI generated avatar reading recorded audio in like your simulated voice, right? Off in the dark room and like put an audience in the scene if you want to. Yeah. So that the reality is that like you have more tools, you use them. And there isn't anything that really fundamentally has changed. Other than that, I'd say human connection is even more important than it ever has been and will continue to be increasingly more important. It's amazing how strongly I react to synthetic content today, right? It annoys me to no end. And I really have grown to appreciate more stuff where it's like, yes, this person took time to like build a thing and make it and record themselves doing it. I'm not saying that I hate all AI generated content. Some of the stuff is, pretty clever and interesting and original and unique. But, seeing people do like the simple basic things is even more useful and more interesting to me. And it doesn't take a lot, right? You got your cell phone in your hand, you got a whole production studio ready to go, right? And so the focus is unchanging. Think about who you are communicating to, right? If it's a hiring manager, if it's a recruiter, put yourself in their shoes. What problems are they trying to solve, right? Like, yes, know what problems you're trying to solve, but what problems are they trying to solve? And how can you position yourself as a solution to that problem in a mutually beneficial way? If you can do that, then it doesn't matter if you're an introvert or extrovert, you'll just be pointed in the right direction to do what you need to do to network effectively. And so for me, it's not about being me centered. It's about being you centered. What problems do you have? How can I help you solve them? How can I think carefully about that and then put myself out there? And so, the other thing that maybe I could recommend to an introvert is practice, right? Practice, 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 practice. Your first post will be terrible. Your second post will be less terrible. Your third post might be terrible again, but by the fourth time, you're really starting to hit your stride, right? And the more that you practice, the more comfortable you become. I used to be way more introverted when I started out my career. And the good news is that you can change, you can adapt new skills so that you go from maybe being an introvert to being more ambiverted and being able to kind of like be more extroverted in the times when you need to, but then kind of peel back. And so, I don't really worry about the introverts. If anything, I worry more for the extroverts, right? Because the competition is just that much stronger. It used to be easy to be kind of like, hey, show up in the room, be bold and, get attention. But now, increasingly folks have the tools to do that without bursting into the room.
Yeah. So I love that. So a few things I took away. Networking takes many forms. There's no one way to network. And networking is a skill that can be learned. I think a lot of people determine they're not good at it or they are good at it and don't realize you can actually, put some time in, invest, and get better at this skill.
Yeah, 100%. And it is not something, it's something that you must practice regularly, right? Must do it. And here's the thing too is I tend to smash a lot of things around. Like for instance, I'm not much of a work-life balance guy. I'm kind of more of a work-life integrationist. And so, when I think about networking, I think of it as a way for me to practice cross-functional communication. I think about how communicating with human beings also helps me to better communicate with LLMs and vice versa. And so when I'm practicing networking, I'm also thinking about how I'm using those same skills, communication, simplifying complexity, breaking down problems, and applying that both in the work context and in the personal context. The only difference is I'm not going to ask the LLM how its day is going, right? Those are still uniquely human conversations I'm going to have and practice that when I get opportunities. So, and it's important to do that in digital spaces, but then also in physical spaces. So like going and showing up at conferences still very much matters. Being able to sit at a lunch table with someone that you've never met before and just ask them about their life, their career, what they're doing, right? Prioritizing all that stuff. That it's important to practice that, to develop it, to never let go of it, because it will serve you both in life and in career.
So another question. Many engineers can get stuck at senior. What is
Mm.
like one mindset shift that's required to jump from senior to staff to principal?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for me, one of the dangers of being a senior is that you can get so stuck in the weeds for so long that you forget to look up and see the forest, right? From the trees. And so as a senior, it's important to cultivate a habit of knowing more than you think you need to know and continuing to broaden your horizons, right? To continue to ask yourself about the why behind your work as opposed to just the how. I've seen a lot of seniors who just kind of get stuck in that. And like, they're just all but constantly in survival mode, just trying to get things done for today so that they can move on to the next thing. Instead of saying like, well, what could this thing be? If I were to dream and to have all the things that I wanted, what would the world look like tomorrow? And how would that be better for the people that I'm building for? Right. Those are the kinds of things that I think are important to develop going from senior to staff. And then, from there, you're also more interested in your impact on people. Right. So again, it's not just what you do, it's how you do it. And so how you bring people along, right, as you see issues or as you see opportunities, how are you training other people to learn from what you've learned and learning from the mistakes and from the successes? How are you conferring with other colleagues, right, who may be in a similar position and sharing best practices? Are you thinking about how you're building tools and solutions that have a wide impact on other folks, right? Are you paying attention to problems that only you uniquely can solve, right? If there are problems that other people can solve, give them those problems, right? Don't be afraid to let them have it. You go tackle the things for which you're uniquely suited, right? So that you're more impactful. And then just, taking seriously the importance of documenting your work and writing. Anyone who's done anything worth doing in the world, they're remembered in part because they wrote down, right, their view of the world, their understanding of the world and the things they learned. And it's important for, Staff Plus to articulate clear visions of what the world can be and how we get there, and then to share that vision and get buy-in. Sometimes it's just have a conversation with a couple of people, let them knock it around a bit, firm it up, then get wider and wider. And so, for me, even in the role that I serve right now as a principal at my company, I'm not just thinking about, okay, well, how am I shaping things within my team or within the org department, but then like, how can I also share some of these learnings with the world, right? In a, compliant and in a way that doesn't get me fired, right? For sharing secrets, but like, how do I provide and contribute to these larger discussions outside of the company across the industry and learn from other people? I have friends who are in similar positions doing similar kind of work, and I tap in with them. Hey, what kind of things are you seeing? What kind of opportunities? What kind of new tools are you discovering? I have a friend of mine's a former Googler. We go to dinner sometimes. Yeah, he just did a video today on web MCP. It turns out that that just got announced today, and there's some they're looking for some folks to experiment with it. And it's important to be plugged into those kinds of things, right? And to have friends who can make you aware of these opportunities so that you can consider them, right? So that is something that I've cultivated over years, right? And I learned how empowering that was, even as a senior engineer, right? Who wanted to expand my impact, and did that by way of like interview coaching, right, among other things, and making YouTube videos on and posting stuff on LinkedIn, right? I began to understand that, like, yes, I can have this big impact outside of just the work that I do every day, and cultivate leadership and communication and all these other kinds of things. And I think, again, it wasn't easy in the beginning, but a decade later, it has paid off in dividends in terms of my own career growth. And in case no one picked up on this earlier, I stepped into a principal software engineering role after 4 years of not being a full-time software engineer. I don't know how many people do that, but I know that I was able to accomplish that. And I think that it was in part from thinking about how I needed to develop myself as a professional, even not being a daily software engineer. Like, what can I do to just continue growing and developing the skills that will serve me, in by the time I actually want to take that next step to the next level. So I'm glad that I didn't really feel like I lost any time, right? Stepping away from the industry for 4 years, because I was still doing and espousing and shaping all of those qualities that you need to be effective as a principal software engineer and beyond.
So you touched on something that I'm always telling people: be very intentional about your career, even when you're moving around. We'll get to this a little bit more. We'll dig into this a little bit more in a few minutes. But it sounds like even in that time away from the industry, you were really intentional about how you were growing yourself as an engineer and as a builder.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And interestingly enough, I was growing myself by teaching other people, right? Being in a situation where I was serving a boot camp in Delaware called Code Differently. Shout out to Code Differently folks if you happen to be watching this. But teaching other junior engineers how to be engineers, going back to those first principles of the craft, and knowing them well for myself, and rehearsing them, and then sharing them with the students, really helped me to just stay in that engineer's mindset and think about all the things that it takes to go from zero to well-defined, well-built, production-ready software. So that was the first thing. Second thing was just, again, constantly building, right? Like, as a builder, I didn't need to have a day job in order to be building. I just, it's just something that's built into my bones. And so even those years away, I'm building things. I'm building things for my students. I'm building things for myself. I'm pushing myself to put it out there, right? Like, can I build this and make it production ready and then actually get money for it? If I can, it really validates that the idea was worth doing. And if not, then great, I can take that feedback and go put that into the next idea. So, that was very helpful. Making YouTube videos, right? And in teaching audiences of people around the world, communicating in such a way that people are like coming to my channel and wanting more. That's helpful, right? If I can talk to, thousands of developers all around the world and get them to click on my video hundreds of thousands of times, then certainly I can talk to engineers, at my company, and help them understand why this approach that I want to take is the right approach, right? And here are the trade-offs and all that stuff. So that is, I feel like these aren't things that were new to me when I left Google and decided to be my own man, as it were. I had been developing and shepherding them well before people were watching. And when the time came for me to then just take that to another level, it was a natural transition and not a kind of a jarring one.
Confirm, I benefited from that skill set that you were building even before you left Google. So tell me a little bit about, how does a staff plus engineer stay current and kind of keep their skills relevant? And do you think that's been affected by AI, or is that the same as it's always been?
Yeah, again, a lot of this is unchanged. So articles, YouTube videos, white papers, getting plugged in on Reddit, right? Less Stack Overflow than usual. I'll admit that much, but yeah, there's a lot of that process has remained unchanged. I tend to be very active on LinkedIn, and just kind of keeping my ear to the ground to hear what's coming. So that has been helpful. What has changed again is just being able to have AI as a tool that I can more precisely ask questions, right? And really follow a train of thought. And so, being able to just customize my learning journey to what works best for me is a game changer. So it used to be you Google for whatever you can get. You just kind of go one blue link at a time until you feel like you have sufficient information, versus now I can go to an LLM, whether that be Gemini, ChatGPT, whatever it is, and say, I want to learn specifically about this thing. And I want you to turn that into a podcast that I can listen to, or I want you to turn this into an article, at this reading level, or I want you to make a video, right? Or a presentation so I can consume it that way. And so being able to tailor the educational content to what works best for me is just incredible. I was getting ready for a system design interview, and I needed to drive to Arizona to support my mom, who was recently widowed. And I was like, okay, I'm going to Arizona, but I also need to prepare for this job interview. I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to use Notebook LM. I'm going to feed it like designing data intensive applications and the job description, and then just make it give me all these mini podcasts that I can listen to in the car on the way. And then I'm going to turn on Gemini in conversation mode, and I'm going to interrogate Gemini about all the stuff that I just learned and like situations I could think of. It was incredibly game changing, right? To be able to do like 3 hours of interview prep on a 5-hour, 6-hour ride to Arizona from where I live in LA. I'd never felt so empowered, right? To just consume just a ton of information and work with that in an interactive way while being at the wheel of a car. So, and to feel like, yeah, I'm safe doing this. I feel like I'm talking to a passenger in the car, another engineer, just sitting right next to me and is interacting with me. So that's really cool. Like the power to just be able to ask dumb questions is game changing. I love it. Right. Cause I don't worry about like asking those kinds of things and feeling like I'm stupid or inferior or whatever. I still struggle with imposter syndrome like anybody else does. So being able to ask those dumb questions and just kind of get them out the way is great. And that has been, again, one of the biggest game changers for me in this year and in this time.
Shouting out one of my favorite AI tools, Notebook LM. I love doing deep dives in Notebook LM.
Yeah.
So tell me, with the always on nature and speed of tech, how are you coaching engineers to stay kind of in that high performing space without hitting a wall?
Yeah. So again, for me, it always just comes to building things, build, 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 build. And it doesn't even really matter what you build, but if you prefer build in areas that you really care about. For me, I care about helping engineers with technical interviews and with their career. And so like coming up with ideas within that space really helped to connect the building with something that I personally cared about. But that's really what it is when you know what you want to build, then everything else is just about getting there, getting to that end result. And so you'll be just that much more motivated to press through the frustration of like trying to get the system to do something and it just keeps getting it wrong, right? Just keeps getting it wrong. But I really want to get to the end of the solution. So I'm going to try again. And oh, okay, wow, I found the one thing that unblocked me and allowed me to move forward. So I think that building has always been the thing that keeps me sharp. But, I'm a kinesthetic learner, right? And so that's just the way that I learn, is by putting my hands on things, taking it apart, reassembling it together, and to do all that like while standing on my 2 feet, literally. I learn so much better when I'm standing on my feet and walking around than I am sitting down and watching something passively. So I think it's just important, and even more important now, right, for folks to be building off the clock and experimenting with things for 2 reasons. Number one, the job market still is a bit shaky compared to what it was 4 or 5 years ago. And there's a certain value in continuing to be overemployed, I think is what the experts call it, right? So you just never know when company priorities are going to shift. We're all basically, on at-will employment terms, right? You just don't want to be a situation where, okay, now you're thrown into the panic of trying to find your next gig because, you've been spending all your time in your day job and not kind of planning for the future. So that's the first thing. But then the other thing is that, there's this space is changing so quickly that there isn't a paved path for like, there isn't like this education plan that anybody gives you for like being staff or staff plus for the future, right? Like nobody knows what the future is going to be. And so you need to be as quickly as possible learning what you can and just trying every new tool in a safe way, but trying it or at least learning something about it, right? And staying informed. Because if you don't, you run the risk of being left behind very quickly. So yeah, there's and again, where I still I go to colleges and universities and I fuss at the students that I ask them questions like, do you know how like just the prompt tool for ChatGPT works, right? Like from the time that you submit a prompt to the time that you see a response, do you know how that works? And the students go, no. I'm like, well, why don't you? It's like, couldn't you ask ChatGPT how it works to explain like what that process is and make an illustration and give you sample code? Like if I wanted to ask ChatGPT to build a ChatGPT client for me, it would do it and give me all the code and I could look at it and interrogate and ask, hey, why is this line of code here? Why is this system there? Oh, okay. How are you doing like the, updating the text and streaming that out? Those are the kinds of things. It's just, it's too amazing to me to see that. I mean, as a geek who grew up in Compton, going to the Compton Library, having like 3 technology books that were a decade old, right? In the 90s, to go from that to being able to like ask Codex or Claude Code to like generate this whole system and like give me examples that are like as current and as recent as yesterday, right? For a thing is incredibly empowering. I don't understand why people aren't more excited about this stuff and just digging in with both hands. But again, it's interesting how curiosity as a skill and as a trait matters way more than it ever has before. It's always been important, right? The humility to know that there's more to learn, right? And that you don't know everything. The curiosity to probe the things that you don't understand and to learn more about them without fear. The ability to communicate, right? For the point of like teaching other people and then thus learning more yourself, right? Those kinds of things, they matter so much. And I think that someone who can be curious, someone who can be courageous, right, to go build things, and then someone who can communicate well, that's the kind of person that you need to be successful in this AI world going forward.
You pulled the curiosity point right out of my head. It really does sound like curiosity is like the biggest advantage right now. And to your point, going back to how we had to learn, there's really no excuse to not learn and to not grow and to figure something out because the information is out there. All you need to do is have the curiosity and the courage to be able to take that on. So I love that. Thank you for pulling it out of my head.
Thanks. Don't ask me to repeat it because I don't know what I just said. I hope
Well,
it's good.
It's great that we're recording.
Yeah.
So you've had a successful technical career and coaching career. Is it still a risk to say take sabbaticals, start something new, or make a lateral move? Or is this the kind of career redefinition that's going to be the new norm?
Oh, 100%. I mean, like all of our jobs are already changing beneath our feet. So we're all being forced to make these lateral moves, whether we like it or not. And so I think the more that you can just kind of get ahead of that and force yourself into that new habit, the better off you're going to be. The folks who are in trouble are the folks who are just resisting change for the sake of trying to keep things the same. And, I'm not saying that you need to go and just stop everything you're doing and just adopt all the new stuff tomorrow. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that it's important to work through the emotional journey, really, that's involved in this. And folks might be interested to learn this. I was just as terrified about all this AI stuff as anybody else when I first, started learning about its capabilities and seeing, the stuff that's going on. And, and maybe I was a little bit slower to adopt than some other folks, but, I eventually got there because I realized like, you know what? This is big and scary. I need to jump in and figure this out. And, the first thing that happened after jumping in was like, oh yeah, no, this isn't replacing my job anytime soon. But the second thing that I learned, right, is that it went from being something scary to being something incredibly empowering. And that got me really excited, right? And so a lot of what we're seeing, I think, is about, going from that, oh my God, this is going to take my job, or this is something that's going to blow up the world, to no, there are some ways in which this is going to be incredibly empowering. There's also some really risky stuff there too. We should acknowledge that, call it out, be aware of it by all means. Things like plagiarism, right? And all of this stuff that we're benefiting from was fed on content that real human beings made and spent years of their lives crafting. Are we, are those people still going to build, right? Are we going to contribute things that become investments in what the future of technology will be, right? We need to ask those tough questions, right? We need to think about energy usage and the environment, and how, spinning up all these servers around the globe, what that's doing to surrounding environments. We need to have those discussions. Those are important. We shouldn't forsake that. But also realizing that what we will be capable of accomplishing with these tools would be so far beyond what we've ever been able to do. And that can be a great thing if there are enough of us who are willing to responsibly engage, right? And thoughtfully. And that's what I want to be able to do, right? And bring to that is a certain wisdom to using these tools and embracing them in a way that is responsible and not destructive.
Love that. Using these tools with wisdom. So wrapping up with a rapid fire round, one tool besides an IDE you can't live without in 2026.
Ooh, I can say Claude Code.
Not an IDE.
Okay, yeah, I'm gonna go with Claude Code.
Nice. So one programming language that is surprisingly resilient right now.
JavaScript. My God.
JavaScript is going to make it to the end, I tell you.
I tell you, yeah. The roaches will be using it.
Right? So last one piece of advice you'd give your 22-year-old self, or your son, as you mentioned, who is starting his career. But what would you give that 22-year-old version of yourself today?
Yeah. I would say not only build more, but publish more, right? Be less afraid of letting people see your work and learning from the feedback that you receive, whether positive or negative. If I had been more willing to do that at 22, I'd be so much further, I think, in my life and my career. But things happen the way that they happen so that I could tell you that.
Thank you so much, Anthony, for dropping so much wisdom on us. This has been the best conversation. Thank you so much for doing this. And where can people find you if they have questions?
Well, thank you so much, Erica, for having me. And if you want to find me, I'm at anthonydmays.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn at Anthony D. Mays, or on YouTube, Anthony D. Mays. All the things, Anthony D. Mays.
Awesome. Thank you again so much. Thank you, everyone, for watching.
Thanks.